Hi, I'm your host, Kevin Eikenberry, and usually these episodes are about me sharing a short piece of information with you or bringing on a guest. But for the next 6 weeks, as a part of this very special series called The Evolving Workplace, I'll be handing the mic over to Wayne Turmel. Wayne's been my co-author of The Long Distance Leader twice, The Long Distance Teammate, and The Long Distance Team. And he's been the host of an ongoing podcast called Long Distance Work Life Podcast, which has just come to a close. Although all those episodes are worth your time, go to longdistanceworklife.com to learn more. In this series, Wayne will give new context and new ideas for us as leaders to understand the evolving workplace and how we can lead our organizations and teams through it. Hope you will enjoy all of these episodes in the series, and I hope you'll continue to enjoy everything else we bring you on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And now, here's Wayne.
Hi, everybody. Group. I want to thank you for joining us for the second special edition podcast on the evolving workplace. Last episode, we spent a lot of time, and I know it was a little bit long, talking about how we got here, sort of a timeline from basically 1990 to today, how we got to remote work, the implications of that. Well, today, as of, and I'm recording this on February, help Mr. Wizard, 2nd of 2025, camps have basically broken into three ways of working: fully remote, fully in the office, and hybrid. We're going to take a look at all three, and we do not recommend any one particular way of working. Very often at the Kevin Eikenberry Group, we have been kind of lumped in with the remote work zealots. The fact of the matter is, every organization, every team, every leader has to make the right decision based on the outcomes they want to get. Remember, outcomes, others, and ourselves. But let's take a look at what works and doesn't about each of these, and so what? So COVID came and it supposedly went, although it may or may not have. But we are settling into something that I put in quotes as a new normal. The problem, of course, is that nobody can agree on what that is. Depending on what you do for a living, where you work, how you work, you may work remotely full-time, you may be in the office every day, or you may be working some kind of hybrid agreement. And the last part is important. Many of the decisions about how your organizations work are made for emotional reasons. People like getting together. The CEO hates seeing empty desks that he or she is paying for. It's or expediency. It's too disruptive to our systems to do whatever it is that people are asking for. Let's take a look at each of these. We're going to start with remote first. This is not in order of preference or effectiveness. We got to start somewhere. This way of working makes remote work the default standard. In other words, there is no major headquarters where everybody reports. The assumption is that people will not be in physical contact most of the time. Doesn't mean they never are. A lot of remote first organizations are willing to invest in annual, semi-annual events. The Kevin Eikenberry Group does that. We only see each other as a whole group once a year, and that works for us. Here are the advantages in no particular order. First of all, there's a lot less money spent on physical infrastructure, desks, buildings, heating offices that people aren't in, things like that. Hiring can be done on a talent first basis. In other words, we want the very best people. We don't care where they are. We will work with them because we want the very best people. This is why the companies that are largely making remote first work are purely knowledge work. NVIDIA, the people behind ChatGPT, the new social media apps, Blue Sky, has no headquarters to fill. It's easy to accommodate time zones, languages, and geography if you're not glued to 9 to 5 in a specific time zone. So if you need to be responsive 24/7, it's easier if people have the flexibility to do that. Here's the thing, remote workers who are productive and engaged are seriously productive and engaged. Study after study shows that people in a remote environment are pretty happy with the way things work. And as a result, the ones who take their jobs seriously and work really hard are seriously engaged. They're not going anywhere. Now, the downside, and we're going to talk about the disadvantages here, the downside is that if you are disengaged, it just becomes easier and easier to become disengaged if you are working remotely. What does this mean? It means leaders need to be very intentional about creating a culture that people want to engage in, that they want to do good work, and they want to do their best. And there are rewards and, yes, punishments associated with that. Okay, there are some disadvantages, let's be honest, to remote first work. The first is there's a branding problem. You don't drive by a remote first company and see their name on a building and give them that kind of mental credibility that a lot of organizations have. They just aren't perceived the same. And one of the reasons for that is customers don't know where to go, right? You don't receive customers in person. Very often, if customers need to reach you, they feel like they can't. They go into voicemail hell. They wait for a response, whether it's longer or shorter a time is largely a matter of perception, but it's there. Customers have a harder time finding you, and as a result, you need to do something to address that. It's hard, it's not impossible, but it's hard to create metrics that measure outcomes versus activity. It's very easy for me to see, oh, so and so always shows up at the office on time and they don't leave early and they're always there, and so they're a good employee. Well, are they really, right? We all know people who show up and are physically present and don't accomplish a whole lot. Napoleon famously said that he wanted generals who were smart and lazy because they generally found how to do more stuff in a shorter period of time. That's what you're looking for in a remote employee. If you don't have them or can't develop them, it can be very, very tricky. Here's the thing. There's not a lot of success stories to benchmark against. You can look at a company like Amazon, primarily Office First, and you can say, oh, I see what they're doing. It's really hard to benchmark against something like Blue Sky, which only started existing a year and a half ago, and isn't really transparent about how they work. If I'm starting a company, I want to benchmark against the leaders in the field. Maybe the biggest disadvantage is that leaders aren't comfortable leading in this environment. If you are above a certain age, and we said in our last episode, remote work didn't even really kick off until 30 years ago. So if you are of a certain demographic, he says, trying to not use the O word, old, you may not have a lot of experience leading in a remote environment. This is what we at the Kevin Eikenberry Group try to do, is talk people off the ledge and say, hey, it's not that different, but there are differences and you need to pay attention. What we are finding is remote first work works best when you have an experienced workforce, and experience not just in terms of the industry, but in terms of work habits. If you're hiring people out of college, you may want to get them physically together more often than not, Whereas if somebody has been in the workforce a long time, they maybe have a family or they have a life outside of work, and they are seeking flexibility, those are the people who are largely successful. If you have a lot of turnover, remote first work may not be great for you. All right, so let's look at the flip side of remote first, and that is in office. And this is where we get all the return to office mandates. We're hearing a lot about that. We're hearing organizations say, nope, people are going back to the office, whether that's Amazon or the US federal government is putting a big kibosh on remote work and insisting everybody come back. Why? This is the question. There are plenty of valid reasons to have remote first work. The work depends on a physical product. Amazon, for all of its web-based services and its algorithms, is essentially a horse and buggy moment. There is a there's a warehouse, there is a truck, stuff has to get from the warehouse onto the truck, delivered to somebody's home. It makes sense that 85% of Amazon's workforce couldn't work remotely if they wanted to. Now, that might make a lot more sense. If you look at, and I'm not getting political here, the current move in the US federal government, nobody works from home, everybody has to be at the office. One has to wonder whether that is a legitimate quest for productivity. Are people going to be more productive? Are we going to have the best people doing the best work by having them in physical locations? Or is this part of a mindset that says government workers, by definition, are lazy and useless, and if we don't ride herd over them like rented mules, nothing will get done? I suspect there's a little bit of both here. I do not pretend to know what is in people's minds, but here are the very real advantages of in-office first. The first is physical proximity should, theoretically, make communication faster, build more solid relationships. It's certainly easier to communicate regularly with people who aren't part of your team. You see Alice from accounting heading for the coffee machine. You can stop her and ask her a question you might be unable or reluctant to do if you're working remotely. Everybody working at the same place at the same time means that the systems are set up to maximize that environment. Training, onboarding, succession planning, all of those things, the metrics that you use and the plans that you lay to develop people and keep the organization running over a period of time, they're just easier to track and keep tabs on. Onboarding and training is simpler when people are all together. That's why even remote first work organizations arrange for people to get physically together. They may not be in the office, they may not be in the city that the CEO lives in, but they actually find some advantage in getting together at least some number of times. Synchronous work is the norm. People understand it for the most part. There's less adjusting that has to go on. And leaders are comfortable, or at least they should be, with the way things work. Okay, but there are some disadvantages. One is it's expensive. You need an office, you need furniture, you need the heat and lights turned on. And there's little flexibility. When headcount goes up or down, you have the same amount of floor space. Also, while organizations that are in office first say we want world-class talent, the fact of the matter is what they're really saying is we want world-class talent that lives within 20 miles of our office. And favoritism, individual employee requests, frequently, even though they are in office, there is still a lot of stealth remote work that goes on. Somebody has a sick kid, somebody is traveling, somebody is working on a project and they need to focus and they can't have Bob in their ear all day. So even though they are in office, there is all this informal, unregulated, and untracked remote work going on anyway. If you've ever gone through an office and seen half of the desks are assigned to people, but nobody's at them, you're probably aware that this is a problem. And so a lot of organizations have said, hey, let's go to hybrid work. And the problem with hybrid work, as some of you have heard me say in the past, is that it is usually not a strategy, it is a hostage negotiation. And by this, I mean, well, we want them back in the office, but we don't want them to quit. And the workers are like, well, we don't really want to go into the office, but I need a job. And so they negotiate, okay, you're in 3 days a week. This solves some of the problems, but it doesn't solve all of them and actually creates more problems. So let's start with the advantages. Employees like it. If I don't have to go into the office every day, if I don't have to commute every day, that makes me happy. Happy employees are a good thing, right? Managers and longtime employees have asked for this the most. And if you are trying to hire managers and leaders, you've probably discovered that the ability to have flexibility in your schedule is the most demanded non-salary related perk over a lot of other things that you would think would be important. Turns out the corporate gym isn't nearly as important as a corporate gym membership program where I can join the gym closer to where I live. That flexibility is becoming more and more important. Fewer interruptions, right? If you have a sick kid, if you have the sniffles, if there's a snowstorm, work can still get done. Work continuity is very often at a very high rate and sustained very well in a hybrid environment. It's somewhat easier to recruit and hire experienced people because, as we say, they want that flexibility and it's something that you can offer. Having to get people get together at least some of the time should make synchronous work easier. Synchronous work, everything happens at the same time. The handoffs, if you need an answer, you know that so-and-so is there to get it for you. And social relationships are more easily formed and maintained. We are essentially, most of us, myself included, as much as I am a curmudgeon and an introvert, we need other human beings. Now, there are some disadvantages, and it's a pretty long list. As a matter of fact, if you listened to some of the episodes of the Long Distance Work Life, there are a lot of people who say hybrid work is, in fact, unsustainable. Once the leases are up, people are going to realize that we don't need all that physical space. And the physical space does create a problem because if you've only got three people in the office 3 days a week, you need the same amount of space as if they were 5 days a week. The office doesn't shrink physically based on the fact that nobody's there on Monday. They are still restricting hiring to physical proximity because if I need to be in the office 3 days a week, I still need to be within commuting distance. Scheduling is very often based on perception. The CEO wants to see people at working. They don't want to pay for space that people are not occupying. That can become more important than actual output and productivity. Again, what are you measuring? Are you measuring presence? Yes, people are there. Are you measuring how much work they get done? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Many leaders in a hybrid environment default to the in-office mindset, and this means that proximity bias can be very real. If we're talking about developing employees, if we're talking about building bench strength, if we're talking about giving people in various parts of the organization opportunities, there's a tendency to default to the people who are physically present most often. In some cases, that's great. You need a job done. You can just put your hand on the person, metaphorically, who is closest and get that stuff done. But there are very real challenges with making sure that we manage and lead, give feedback, coach, the people who are not in the office as often as we do those who are there most every day. Remote work can impact training, development, and delegation opportunities. And so it's really important that leaders are mindful of who's on their team, what can they do, what do they want to do, and they don't just do what's easier, which is turn to their right, turn to their left, find somebody and do it. Those who do not have flexibility may complain about unfairness. This is actually low key one of the reasons that Amazon is going back to the office, because there is a perception from 85% of the employees, we have to go to the office every day. Why don't they? Perceived unfairness, perceived inequality is a very real challenge in hybrid teams. And so, as you can see, there are pros and cons to each of these systems. Few of the advantages apply to everybody, and most of the disadvantages can be mitigated if we're thoughtful about what we're doing and we practice intentional, flexible leadership. Here at the Kevin Eikenberry Group, we believe that all of the leadership skills necessary to work in any of these environments and make them work can be developed. And a matter of fact, there are more similarities than differences. We just need to be aware of the different conditions for each of these working modes. At the Kevin Eikenberry Group, we specialize in developing leadership skills. Visit kevineikenberry.com to learn how. One size doesn't fit all. It's incumbent on leadership at all issues to recognize what works and what doesn't, and match the approach of the needs of the organization, their customers, and their employees. So my name is Wayne Turmel. Thanks for listening. Next episode is going to be on what's happening in technology and what that means for the likes of you and I. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate you. See you down the road.